Hello and welcome back. This is Candace from Candoodle, and today I'm going to be sharing some last-minute card ideas using Digi stamps. The first is just some quick and simple coloring, and the second is going to use the Digi stamp with foiling. So let's get started. So for both of these cards, the first step is printing out the Digi stamp. So I'm just going in Word and going to Photos and putting in the winter wreath from 3 Room Studio. And I'm making that 5 inches because this is going to go on a square card, and then I'm just going to print that out. And for the second one, I'm doing the same thing, but this time I'm adding one of the Christmas circle sentiments down to the center. So for this one, I'm clicking the layout, and then you just want to hit in front of text. That way you're going to be able to reposition it without the back wreath affecting where it's going. And I'm just going to size that down until I'm happy with it, and then I'm going to print that one out as well. And this one is the one that's going to be foiled, so I am going to make sure to print it on my LaserJet printer, and I go ahead and print it on some blue cardstock, but we'll come back to that one later. So for the first card, I did cut the printed sheet down to about just under 5 1/4 because I am going to mount it on a 5 1/2 inch square card. I colored the bells first, and I just laid down a simple gold color because we are going to come back in and add some paint to those. And for the other ones, I'm just using a 2 or 3 Copic color blend, and I'm keeping the darkest colors towards the outside of the wreath and then blending it out to the lightest towards the inside. And I did fast forward the coloring a bit because I did the same thing for each of the items, again with the darkest facing towards the outside of the wreath and the lightest towards the inside to try and give it like a bit of a radial look. Like I wanted the light to look like it was coming from the center. And so I just did that for each of the items, and I chose some non-traditional Christmas colors, but to try and keep the look nice and cohesive. So I just did some greens, I did some blue little mittens, and then of course the traditional colors for the gingerbread men and things like that. What I will say is I didn't foil this one because I printed it on my inkjet printer, but you can foil this if you color with Copics and have printed on a LaserJet printer. But I didn't do that for this one. So I'm just taking my Gansai Tambi and I'm taking the yellow gold color and just watering that down to a nice consistency, and then I'm going to paint over each of the bells. I tried to not go over the black lines, but it was kind of hard. But don't worry if that does happen, because what I ended up doing was after I was finished and the paint was dry, I came in with a Copic multi-liner and just went right back over those black lines, and you can't even tell. And so I decided once I was done the bells that I wanted to add a bit more shine, so I came back in with the white gold and just added some little touches to the steam coming off the coffee, and then I'm coming in with my white gel pen to just add some highlights to each of the stamped images. Now I'm coming in with my Misty, and I'm going to show you a trick that I use so I don't completely ruin something I've just spent a lot of time on. I take a piece of tracing paper. You could also use vellum. I just have a lot of tracing paper and it's a bit cheaper. And I put my sentiment where I think it's going to look good, and then I stamp it down and see if I'm happy with the placement. If I am, then I go ahead and take that away and stamp it down. And if I'm not, it gives me time to reposition it without completely ruining my card. So once I was done that, I am going to line it up on my card base, and it looked a bit naked to me at this point, so I decided I wanted to add a little bit more. So I just went back in with that same yellow gold from the Gansai Tambi palette and painted around the edges of my card base. The paint didn't go down too well because this is a cheaper card base one that I'm just trying to use up, but I just did it in a couple layers with a lot of patience, and it ended up looking just fine. And then I am sticking down my front panel with some ATG, and the first card is done. So that is what it looks like, and it has some nice shine on the bells and the coffee steam. So for the second card, I printed the wreath with the sentiment on my LaserJet printer, and I printed that onto some blue cardstock because I thought that would be nice. And then I'm taking some Deco foil, which is foil that sticks to the toner ink from LaserJet printers. And so I'm just going to cut this down a little bit, and I have my laminator heating up off to the side here. And I'm just cutting this down so it'll make it easier to go through my laminator. And then I cut a piece of foil that was the size to fit right over my wreath. And then I'm just taking a folded piece of parchment paper, like regular kitchen parchment paper, and sticking that in with the foil pretty side facing up. And then I'm going to run that through my laminator. What I will say is this is sped up times about 5 or 6, so it is a bit slow to go through. I fed it through twice with the parchment paper and once without, just because I felt like it wasn't looking like the foil had adhered down. I'm not super happy with this laminator. It doesn't seem to get very hot, but I have seen a lot of crafters using the Royal Sovereign one. This one gets the job done, but if you are thinking of investing, I think that one might be a better bet. So there's the peel up, and that is just absolutely so fun. I never foil enough. I really should break my laminator out more. And now I decided that I wanted to do some distress oxide blending over this, and here is me having a slight panic on camera because as I started to put the ink over, I noticed the foil went white and lost its shine. So I thought I was too far gone and would have to scrap this, but I came in with a paper towel and buffed it, and it did get some of the shine back. And at this point I was hemming and hawing, and I didn't know if I was going to scrap this or not, so I was holding it up to the light, deciding, okay, is this okay? I was seeing if it had rubbed the foil off or something, and that's why it was giving that look. But after I buffed it a bit more, it seemed okay. And at this point, I just committed and went with it. And I'm actually really happy with how it turned out. So as you can see, it's looking very white right now where the foiling is, and it's not very shiny. But once I go in and buff off the excess ink, it does get that foil back. So it's just the oxide ink covers that foiling a little bit so it doesn't catch the light as much, but once you buff it off, it is more than okay. It's not quite as shiny as when it first comes through the laminator, but I think the ink blending adds a nice touch, so I was willing to let it be a bit less shiny. So in the light you can see it's totally shiny and looking normal now. So now I'm cutting that down again to just 5 1/4 because it is going to be mounted on a 5.5 inch square card. And then once that is done, I am going to come in with my ATG and just stick that down, and then that card will be done. So this video would end there, but I wanted to do a bit of an experiment with the remnants of the foiling that we did because I don't like things to go to waste in my craft room, so I try and use them as much as I can. So I saved that negative piece from before, and now I'm taking some Deco Foil Transfer Gel Duo. So this is a newer formulation of the old one. The old one you could just use in a laminator, but this one you can use in either a laminator or a die cut machine and it will work. So I'm just mapping out where my foiling is going to fit onto a piece of paper and marking that off with some pencil. That way I can come in and apply the gel only to the area that's needed. And with this you want to get a thin coat that's relatively even. So I came in with my palette knife first, and then you'll see I come in with an old gift card and smooth that out to try and get a really thin and even coat that doesn't have a ton of streaks. And so once that is done, I set it aside for about an hour or two to dry, and as you can see it's shiny, but it is tacky to the touch, and that's when you know it is ready. It'll also dry clear. So I'm putting my foil over top of that and I'm just pushing it down, and then I'm going to put it through my die cutting machine to add pressure, because at this point I had already put my laminator away before I decided I wanted to experiment with this. But you could also run it through your laminator as well if you have the Duo gel. So I got out my Gemini Junior and I'm just taking a cutting plate, the plastic shim, the magnetic piece, and then I'm going to put in my cardstock with the foil on top and then my other cutting plate. And so I am just going to run it through like that. What I will say is I wasn't super careful with how my foil was placed on the cardstock, and there was a little bit of that gel sticking out and it did get stuck to my top cutting plate. It only a little bit. It was fine. I rubbed part of it off with my finger, and then the rest of it I got off with just an adhesive eraser, which I did off screen because I thought nobody would want to see that happening. So if you are worried about that, you could put another piece of paper on top, or just be more careful when you're placing your foil. So now I was thinking that I could just peel this up and it would all be good. But what I wasn't thinking is that it would rip, which is what happened, which, thinking about it now, that makes perfect sense, because in the places where the foiling had gone on our original card, there's now just that Duo gel, which is very sticky, and it's sticking to that transparency at the top. So you can't just peel this up and have the white spaces remain, because those white spaces are essentially covered in glue. So that did not work as I was thinking, but you could cut this down just with that transparency sheet still attached on top and mount that on a card. It's just that thin plastic sheet will have to stay on top if you do want to reuse the remnants. So I did that little experiment so you all don't have to, and hopefully that is helpful for you to use up your remnants of your foil. So that is all for today's video. I hope that something I showed today inspired you. If it did, let me know down in the comments. Thank you so much for being here and spending some time with me. I so appreciate each of you being a part of this channel. I hope everybody has a wonderful holiday season full of happiness and good health. And until then, I will see you in my next video. Bye!